Hello, my name is Niels Iversen, IVERSEN, and I'm about to make one more video about language learning. When I study languages, I work with translations, word lists, handwritten copies, and with or without a translation and formal grammar studies, all that. Things that the more fanatical proponents of the natural method thought they've gotten rid of long ago, but they didn't. I still use them, and I still think that word lists and translations and copying by text by hand can be useful. On the other hand, I also see that reading and listening to genuine sources are absolutely fundamental for learning a language, and these things should be implemented from the beginning. So, how can those things be combined? The central notion is that of comprehensive texts, and text can also be speech in this context. If your study materials are too easy, then you cannot learn from them. If they're too difficult, you cannot learn from them either, because you cannot understand them, or your guesses will be totally off the mark. So you should use study materials that are just above your level. In that way they pose a challenge, but they won't break your neck. There's a snag, however. If you are a beginner in a fairly distant language, then you don't stand a chance to find something to read or listen to that is both comprehensible and interesting. The only texts that are really easy are those in textbooks, and they are generally boring. What then? If you have a teacher, you'll be presented with little tidbits of language, while at the same time you'll be told what they mean and how they sound. But I don't have a teacher, and I don't want one. So what I do is I get a text, preferably with a translation, and then I hack my way through that text sentence by sentence, using the format you see here, which I have already shown earlier in a video. As you can see, there is a margin to the right for new words, and those words will go directly into a word list later. You cannot see it here, but I always fold the paper to make it more handy. When I attacked my guidebook to roads, which I used when I started out with Greek, I knew the alphabet, I have read some grammar, and I have had been through a textbook to learn some easy words, and apart from that I only had a dictionary to help me. So the project took a long time, and I felt almost like a mining enterprise of those that dig up tons of rock to gain 1 ounce of gold. Of course there's a better way, and that's get a translation, and you heard me. Get a translation. You are not in an exam. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to prove how tough you are, and you don't have to show that you can get through anything without any aid. If having a translation can get you to understand a text, then it's smart to get one. You learn more from a text you can understand than from one you don't understand. Translations are good for you, so use them if you can get them. There's a snag. You will soon discover that most translations take a lot of liberties. When you compare them with the original text, you will find that they try to be literature in their own right, rather than an aid to understand the original text. As a language learner, you don't need translations that are beautiful in your own language. You need translations that are as close to the original as possible. And they don't need to be pretty, because if they adhere to the rules of your language, they don't adhere to the rules of your target language. The extreme consequence of this wish is found in the form of hyperliteral translations, as you can find them in, for instance, the German series Kauderwelsch. They can be used constructively to give you a feeling for how your targeted language really functions. And I will give you a couple of examples from the French book Dictionnaire des expressions idiomatiques. In the French book Dictionnaire des expressions idiomatiques, there are things like prendre du bouchon, which means get older, vieillir, or y mettre un bouchon, which means to shut up, se taire. I don't know how common these expressions are in French ordinary speak. But does prendre du bouchon really mean get old? No. It means take some cork. And y mettre un bouchon means put a cork there. When we say that prendre du bouchon means get older, we could just claim that the expression is used in places where you could say get older or get grey hairs in English. And in French they just say something different. So you have to know that there is a correspondence, but actually the Frenchmen don't say the same thing as you do in English. So there's a simple rule. You should always learn all the components of an idiomatic expression, even if there's some kind of added meaning to the whole expression which you can guess from the components. It makes it much easier to remember those expressions than if you had to remember the whole thing as a one immensely long word, and you will get much closer to the thought behind the expression. So word-for-word translations are actually telling you more about your target language than a loose meaning-oriented translation. Now let's have a look at some practical techniques. What you need during the early phases of your study are essentially a lot of bilingual texts. First, I would like to illustrate one little trick that can be used for getting bilingual text with interesting content. You simply use a machine translation. And I already hear the protesters throwing stones at my windows. But the point is, you use it from the foreign language to your own, never the other way. And even if you do that, you only see the translation as a guide, as some helper who doesn't know anything really, but can give you some pointers. It is not a solution. Don't trust it. A good translation is typically either quite literal or it is totally off the mark. And therefore you should take care that the errors are in your own language where you can spot them, not in the language which you are trying to learn, and that's why the direction of the translation is important. In other words, I would prefer a literal translation full of errors to a literary translation that doesn't follow the original closely. And if I could find them, I would of course prefer true hyperliteral translations. Now let's have a look at how you can produce some bilingual text yourself using machine translation. What you see on the screen right now is a Danish hymn written by a man called Grundtvig. I have let Google translate it into English, and the result is not exactly a brilliant translation, but it's good enough for the purpose. I copy a section of the translation and copy it to Word. In the little menu that pops up, I choose Bevar kun text. That is insert as text in English. I have a Danish word. And lo and behold, now we have got alternating Danish and English sentences. I have colored the English translation red, and the whole paper is ready to be printed out now. If I had just inserted the text using Ctrl-V, then you should have seen both versions on the screen, but in the print you would only get one of the versions. So that's why you have to insert it as text. And now you've got a bilingual text. Actually, it's an interlaced or even interspersed text, and you can get it from any text on the internet almost, at least as long as Google has got a translator for it. If you don't trust Google Translate, then you can find many cases of parallel text on the internet with the same content. Then you can use that content for a side-by-side bilingual text. If you have an original and a usable literal translation in digital form, you can make a simple side-by-side bilingual text simply by cutting out sections of text and putting them in the cells of a table with 2 columns in some text editor. And this text is from the homepage of Greenland.com. You will probably discover that the text in the 2 languages don't take up the same amount of space, but then you just move the separating line between the columns. As you can see, the height of the content will adapt when you change the width of the columns. Table columns are better than ordinary columns because the content stays firmly in the cells where you put it. With ordinary columns you could have some kind of spillover effect where the bottom of one column suddenly ends up on the top of the page in the next column. There are homepages on the internet where you can find ready-made bilingual texts galore. For instance, if on the homepage lexilogos.com, there's a mechanism for putting biblical verses together from different languages in combination of 2 or 3 languages, and there are places, and you have to search for them. You will find something. I'm sure about that. But there is one thing you shouldn't do. You shouldn't sit down with 2 books or print out in front of you. I have tried, and it is far too tiring and irritating to switch from one book to the other. If there is any kind of physical distance between them, then you have to search for the text in both versions, and maybe the books will fly around, and it's not fun. We are in a digital age now, and use digital printouts, and you'll be fine. That's all I have to say in this video. Goodbye.